Hello and welcome to the Recruitment Curry Show. Today we're going to be talking about the most exciting topic in the UK recruiting industry, launching your recruitment agency in the USA. And we have our special guest, Will Pendleton from the PGC Group with us today. Will, welcome to the show.
Hi, Getan. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be talking today about all things US with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Will, without further ado, obviously we want to talk about a number of points ranging from the market size to, obviously the trends, the staffing landscape, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't we kick off with the, obviously the market opportunity, in terms of the size, growth opportunities, and further on.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So it's a great place to start because it's probably the most exciting part of the US and why so many businesses are pivoting and focusing all of their efforts onto the US market. It's almost kind of becoming one of the worst kept secrets in recruitment is how amazing it is to recruit in America. And when you look at the size of the market and the size of the opportunity, it becomes quite clear as to why that focus and why a lot of people will have peers and colleagues who are in other businesses who are doing that and have heard about bigger fees and have heard about the opportunity that they do have. But when you consider last year, the world in general, the global staffing industry created about $500 billion in revenue, so just shy of $500 billion, which is amazing to think about in general. So it's a really exciting industry to be involved with. The US generated 186 billion of that $500 billion, the revenue generated by that market. So that was about a 31% market share of the entire world's kind of revenue generated in that, the recruitment and the staffing industry. When you compare that to other markets, so Japan came in second with about 15%, and then the UK came in third. So in the UK, there is about $50 billion or so was generated last year with that same metric, so revenue generated by the industry. So you've got nearly 3.5 times a bigger market in America. And the thing that blows everybody's mind is SIA released some figures last year where they kind of estimated that in the US there's about 27,000 recruitment agencies, and in the UK there's about 28,000 recruitment agencies. Some people estimate that's more towards the low 30,000s. So realistically, even if you take those worst case scenarios or the lowest figure there, you've got the same amount of businesses in each kind of market, but you've got 3.5 times more opportunity to go after in America versus in the UK. So you've got a much larger piece of the pie with much less people going after it. And so what that leads to really is far higher margins in the US market, because you've got clients who are much more desperate for your services. The value of a recruiter in America compared to the value of a recruiter in the UK, even though you're doing the exact same role, is double, sometimes triple in terms of the fee that you can bill. And one of the reasons for that, like we said, is that market saturation. So it's a far less competitive market, and the need for your services and the demand versus the supply is so high that you probably will see most businesses operating on about 25 to 40% margin range. We tend to see, whereas in the UK, you're probably looking about 12 to 20, maybe on a good day. And then with considering that alongside your higher salaries that people typically are paid in America for the same roles as well, that's why you can see double, sometimes triple the value of those deals in the US.
Wow. So thrice the size of the UK and same number of agencies. So obviously, there's a massive ground for the agencies to cover there, and an opportunity, especially with the fees you're talking about between 25 and 40%. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you look at that as well in terms of how the market is predicted to look for this year too, because it's been a fantastic few years for recruitment in general, just due to kind of the bounce back after the pandemic. Everybody's been setting record after record after record, it seems, within their businesses, and the years have got bigger and bigger. This year, it's looking like it's going to be slightly different, isn't it? Because we've got things like recessions being floated around, inflation is happening kind of everywhere. And so there's a lot of people that are a bit more worried about the market. But even with those inflationary pressures in the US, the market is still predicted to grow. And when you remember that last year was a record year, this year, even with all those inflationary pressures, is still predicted to be even bigger. So it's predicted to grow by 2%, which they class as moderate growth. So that 186 billion is going to become roughly $217 billion this year. So even though it's the biggest market in the world, even though there's all of this kind of inflation and worries about recessions going on, the market is still predicted to generate even more revenue than it did last year and be another record setter. So it is, like we said, a lot of people say to us when they're first speaking to us at PGC, are we a bit late? Have we missed the boat? Is the US too, is it too far gone? Well, you can see there from the amount of businesses that there are in America currently, and the fact that the market is just getting bigger and bigger, there really is kind of no missing the boat. You won't have missed the boat for a good few years. So it's never too late to get started.
Wow. So in terms of getting started, let's talk about the growth sectors. In your opinion, because one the sheer size of the country. So what are the growth sectors? One is across the US, and when you talk to your clients, do you talk growth sectors specifically in terms of the respective states, or is it nationwide? How do you sort of consult them?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And it's one that we speak to on every call that we have when we first speak to a business is kind of what's your goal, what's your game plan for the US. And when you, like we said, considering the absolute size of the market there, Joe Biden can't even govern the whole government on his own. He needs 50 other governments, the state governments, to help him because it's too big. So how are you supposed to tackle the entire country? So if there's one thing that we say, it's don't take the whole US on as one go. You want to break it down into chunks and really focus your efforts on one market. Really, if you can, when you get started, it really helps you drill down, start to understand the legislation within that state, within that sector. But it also helps you to build a bit of momentum, understand the people that you're speaking to, because people will vary massively depending on where the region is in the US. So when you're getting started, one of the key things that we say is have a niche and have a focus, both from a sector point of view and also a target location as well. And so being an inch wide and a mile deep is one of the best tips that you can get when you're getting started in America. And so in terms of specific sectors and growth areas, you'll find that there'll be different locations within the US that will suit you better depending on what that niche is. So for example, if you're an IT consultant recruiter, there's going to be markets like Austin, Miami's up and coming at the minute as well. Where if it's life sciences, it's probably going to be more like Boston, maybe North Carolina, California, those places. And so the location you choose will be dependent on the sector that it is that you're focused on. But the opportunity within those sectors, again, are really kind of growing faster than a lot of the others. So the big one that we see most of the agencies we speak with that launch into the US, they're focusing on tech and IT. And that is obviously an amazing market to be involved in. Last year, the temporary, so just contract placements in America in the IT sector specifically, so just IT temporary placements generated a revenue of $45 billion. So the contract IT market alone is nearly the same size as the entire UK staffing industry, which is like crazy. And that's predicted to grow by another 8% this year. Accountancy and finance, that sector is predicted to grow by 7%. Life sciences is about 5%. So when you think that the whole market in general is predicted to grow by 2%, you can really see that all of those growth figures that are happening tend to be happening in the contract market, which is really when you see what you kind of would expect with a recession on the horizon or the kind of inflation pressures. People do tend to look a bit more short term from a client's perspective, and they're thinking about their hiring strategy to be short term and thinking right the next 6 to 12 months rather than the next 4 to 5 years. And so they might be switching from perm to a kind of a contract mindset. And that's kind of where we're seeing probably the general growth happening the fastest, is within that kind of contract market in general. And so I suppose when you're getting started, just do a bit of research first of all, find out what areas you think are going to be the most exciting for you. We're happy to help with that as well, and kind of provide any guidance that we can. But in general, some of the more kind of trends that we're seeing is that mind switching clients from that long-term permanent approach towards project and temporary work as well. And I think a driver of that too in America is, this is also another kind of key difference between the two markets, is in the US there are no notice periods. So notice periods are at will by default, so immediate. So you do get like people being dismissed straight away, or handing in a notice, or not turning up, and they just pack their brown box up like they do in the films, you know, put all the stuff in the desk and walk to the lift and leave and say, I'm out of here. So you will find that it is a really quick turnaround in the US. And because of that, even with permanent roles, you don't actually find that permanent has the same job security that it does in the UK or in other markets, because notice periods by default are at will. People might tend to generally offer around a 2-week notice period as like a goodwill gesture, but they don't actually have to serve that. That's just a goodwill gesture. So what you can end up with is like VPs of businesses and you know, really high up senior roles leaving either immediately or within 2 weeks. And really what that does is drive the value of a recruitment business through the roof, because you've got huge holes in businesses being left really quickly that the clients often didn't see coming. So if you can place someone quickly and have that speed to hire, you're going to find you're going to really improve your standing with that client, but also be able to charge, you know, a much higher fee, because you're able to provide a much more urgent and kind of impressive in some aspects service to them. But then the notice periods that are kind of, because they're so short, a lot of people are not necessarily tied to permanent jobs the way that they would be, in example, in the UK. And so that can again lead to just that general mind shift that we're seeing of people moving from kind of permanent to project. So I think it was Statistica estimate that by 2027, over half the US will be employed on a contract basis. So that's kind of going to be the main kind of focus that
So
we're seeing from the market anyway.
That's a massive opportunity, you know, when it comes to contracts. So, and then, you know, you mentioned about the notice, and, you know, that was my next question, like you mentioned. So the notice periods are, you know, roughly about 2 weeks across the levels then, isn't it? It doesn't matter if it's junior, middle, or even a senior, you know, job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're about standard. You're going to find maybe 2 weeks is normal. And you don't find those really kind of traditional long-term notice periods that you might find in the UK, for example, of like a 3-month, 6-month. Some people even have a year notice periods. And a lot of them you'll find will be requested and not required. So like we said, almost like a goodwill gesture. So please, could you give us at least 2 weeks, 4 weeks about handing in your notice, and vice versa. But actually it's not something that's legally binding. So if it does push comes to shove, people can just leave or be dismissed immediately and without cause. And so that, like we said, just really creates that really transient workforce. I've said transient about 15 times in this conversation, but it really creates that transient workforce in the US. So the speed to hire is going to be so different to it is in the UK, and you can make a placement so much faster, because you know, if you've got a candidate who you think might be interested in a role for you, they can leave their role within 2 weeks, maybe immediately, and start, you know, within a few days. So it's a really quick turnaround too.
So how does it work? You know, because it's a huge country with, you know, almost over 52 states, and then, you know, what I've heard is every state has a different legislation, especially when it comes to recruitment, and, you know, even when it comes to contract placements. If you can, you know, talk about that, because that's one point where lots of businesses, you know, wanting to launch in the US, have a question around, you know, the governance, the legislations, the terms, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is one of the things to kind of almost that really helps get your mind around the market when you get started is kind of understanding that really to treat the US like it's 50 different countries rather than one. So as we mentioned before, you've got the federal government, obviously, in America. So the president, Joe Biden, what comes out of the White House, that's kind of the minimum that all states have to abide by. You then have each state has their own governments. So then again, you've got kind of 50 different states there within that. So it's a bit like the EU in terms of you've got loads of different economies, loads of different governance structures, tax structures. employment rights, all kind of crammed into one kind of region. And you'll have people in neighboring states who are employed completely differently and have different employment rights. So when you're getting started, that's why we said before, having a niche and a focus on one location can really help just get your own head around that. Because like we said, it really is kind of like its own country. So California has the 5th biggest economy in the world if it was a country, but obviously it's just one state in America. I think Florida would be like the 17th biggest economy in the world if it was a country. So all of those states, realistically, they have enough business in them to focus down. So I would say don't get put off by focusing down on one place, because actually the market is massive, and it's really going to help you understand the legislation of the people in that state, and also understand the culture too, because all of those differences that have happened over the last few hundred years in America have created big regional differences. So people in different regions are expecting different approaches. For example, someone in California, New York, Texas, Florida, they're all going to have different employment rights and expect different things when you're speaking to them. So obviously, if you have a one-size-fits-all approach, not only can that cause a bit of a headache for you from a legislative standpoint in terms of how you're supposed to keep track of, my candidate in California gets that amount of sick pay, my candidate in Texas gets no sick pay, just little things like that. So by having that focus, it really helps from day one to get started. But from a permanent perspective, if you're making permanent placements, the most things that you kind of need to be worrying about are things that you can and can't ask a candidate, because a lot of the employment rights that will change, that will be taken on by the client. But the main things that will happen is in different states, you can ask a candidate something, in some states that you can't. For example, New York, they have salary history ban, which means you can't ask what a worker previously earned in their last job, but you can do in other states. So things like that, really understanding the legislation of your states that you're targeting is really going to help you kind of get started from day one. From a contract side of things, that is a lot more complicated, because obviously there's an ongoing obligation to pay a contractor, and that's being outsourced from the client. Usually they want to outsource that out. That's what PGC actually do. So we are an employer of record. So anyone that is interested in making contract placements and making those 30% margins on those deals, please have a chat with me afterwards, and we can talk about how you can do that and how PGC can actually work with you to mitigate that risk and all those complications that come into things. That's what we basically kind of remove from agencies, so they don't need to worry about that. They can just think, make the placement, and then we'll sort the rest out for them. But like you said, Gatan, it is really interesting, and that kind of mind shift of what it's not one country and think of it as 50 different countries can really help get started.
Definitely. So in terms of the timelines, on that note, in terms of setting up the business and getting it up and running, what kind of, timelines are we looking at?
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about beforehand that we really wanted to touch on was kind of corporate governance and the actual operational side of being in the business in America, because obviously, like we said, a lot of people might have heard of the market already, might have heard of the opportunity, but it's actually the operational and the logistical side of running a business in America that puts a lot of people off, or might kind of put the dampers on things. So one of the things that I would say to just kind of start off with that is it's actually because of the trade agreements that the US has, specifically with the UK, if you're in the UK, but other countries as well. The US has lots of different trade agreements, and they basically want to make it as easy as possible for you to do business in America. And so from the UK specifically, from other businesses, to actually make placements, recruitment placements in America, you don't need an entity to do that. So you don't need to worry about setting up a business or incorporating a US entity. You don't need a license to get started either. And you don't even need a bank account to. And a lot of those things actually might come along with setting up an entity, and there's reasons you might want to do that. For example, if you were setting up an office, which we can talk about in a bit as well. But when you're getting started, you don't need any of those things. So you can literally use your existing staff, your existing resources, your existing phone system, computer system. You don't need any kind of different infrastructure really at all. And so it's almost a zero cost approach, and you can trade into America and start generating revenue and really prove that concept from wherever you are in the world. So wherever your office is. It doesn't matter at all. You can literally prove that actually we should maybe commit a bit more revenue. It might be that after 6 months to a year, you're doing fantastic and you think, right, we actually do want an office. And then you've got the revenue, you've got the proof of those relationships in America that you can do that. But you don't need to do that from day one. The thing that we would stress that you do need to have in place from day one is to have your terms of business sorted. So I would say speak with a US attorney or someone with cross-border experience in the US to draft those terms of business. The reason for that is if you're trying to use an international contract or a UK contract with an American company, if they don't pay you, you can't do anything about it because a US court of law is never going to enforce a not US contract. So realistically, just to protect yourself, that's the main thing, is just get those terms of business sorted first of all. Once you've done that, that's kind of the big legal thing really ticked off. There are little things that you can do to make your business development approach a lot easier after that. We talk about putting up a virtual shop front. So my colleague Maria always uses that phrase. So you can get like a virtual US phone number. So for example, if you are going to be targeting Texas, you can get like a Texas extension. So it looks like you're calling from Texas as well, which is a good little kind of hack as well. And then you can get like a PO box or a virtual address within your target market. Again, all giving off that impression to your clients that you are serious about the US, you're US focused, and it really, really helps basically to kind of almost remove a little bit of the issues that can sometimes come if you're calling from an international number. You can sometimes get a bit screened. So that's something that you can do really to kind of just remove those little barriers. Even something silly like changing your location on LinkedIn to be in your target market, that can actually just kind of, again, just remove any roadblocks that there might be during your business development stage. So when you're getting started, like I said, actually don't be too worried. It isn't too scary as long as you've done the big things first of all. So got your terms in place, and then you can start thinking about, right, actually how are we going to focus down, and are we going to get a number, are we going to get an address and things like that. And if you're just looking to trade into the US from wherever your international office is from, then that's really all you need to do from the start of things. Once you've started to get a bit more revenue through the door and it's a bit more of an established business, you started to generate some serious fees and some good traction, you might look at setting up an entity. And the reason that you might do that is, one, eventually you're probably going to owe some tax in the US. So from day one, you're probably not going to have to file for any taxes if you're the guy kind of generating lower than a certain threshold, because only a few states charge tax on recruitment services. But again, once you kind of have made a few placements within a specific state in a certain year, then you're probably going to have an entity, because to file for taxes, you do need that entity. So that might be a reason to look at setting up an entity. And then the other one is, this is going fantastic. Actually, we're going to get even more business if we have boots on the ground and we set up an office. To do that, again, you're going to need an entity. If you want to kind of get a bank account in the US, you need a US entity, all of those things. So if you're serious about building that side of things and landing and expanding, it's the phrase that we refer to it as in opposed to recruiting from afar, then that's where things can get a little bit more complicated. But that's why you just want to make sure you're speaking to trusted professionals who've got experience in the US who can help with that. And yeah, basically, just know that if you are going through that process, it's a little bit more expensive to incorporate in the US. It's not like it is in the UK where you can just log on to company's house and pay you a small fee and you've got a business. You're probably looking at the best part of $10,000, and it's quite a long process. So again, it's a great option if you're really serious about building an American business. But if that's not, and you're just trying to prove the concept when you're getting started, don't worry about that entity, because it's just going to cost loads, and actually you don't necessarily need it from day one.
Definitely. So, start slow from wherever you are, and then, build it up from there. And, if they need help, they can approach somebody like yourself to, guide them through. And then, on that note, Will, and then we touched upon this point, last week when we were talking, boots on the ground. What would you recommend, in your experience? Are the US companies, open to meeting in person, or, is it more Teams and Zoom based discussions? How do you go about it?
Definitely. So yeah, I know you've got some great ideas around that, Ketan, and I know actually that we align in a lot of our views on that as well, because especially businesses in the US, they do like to do things in that traditional sense. So a lot of the times that you will have no issues actually finding clients and doing business development with them. Often a lot of the cold approach and the cold calling in America will actually be a lot more effective. Again, if you think back to the amount of recruitment businesses compared to the need that there is, these businesses are really wanting your services. And so a lot of the time you won't find it hard to actually get on the phone with clients and even with decision makers. But actually kind of keeping hold of them and keeping that stickiness moving forwards can be a little bit harder, because again, if you're in the UK, for example, you've got the entire Atlantic Ocean in the way that's just separating you both. One of the best ways that you can really secure and start that growth and kickstart it with those clients that you've already been having conversations with is maybe within the first few months of your business development that you're doing. If you've just kicked off the US, once you've started to build a few relationships and things like that, get over to America and actually go and meet these people. So book in, a 2-week trip. It gives you a reason to call them again. They'll often, again, like we said, they're a bit more traditional, really want to kind of meet you and have that face-to-face relationship. Just pack that 2 weeks full of every meeting that you can imagine. Even we've got some people that organize events at the end of that. So they'll go and meet everybody. They'll then organize a big event for their industry and get all their clients in the same room, that type of thing. Same with candidates as well, to kind of put an event on for candidates and build that base too. And basically all of that is just going to lead to that relationship kind of skyrocketing and going to the next level. What are your views on that, Ketan? Because I know you have done that yourself and you found that that's really helped you, I know.
Well, I second that, because I've been doing this same activity for the UK for over a decade now, and even a bit for the US. So I spend a couple of weeks every quarter in the UK, and I believe prospects and clients like seeing you in person. So I wouldn't sort of outrightly reject the idea of flying over. Of course, it's going to cost you, and like you mentioned that if you want to prove the proof of the concept, you might have to start small, but making a point to visiting in person, always sort of is cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
You can end up getting much more. Totally agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose for yourself as well, making that trip over all those thousands of miles, it means that little bit more to the client. And also, they've probably seen you more than they've seen their actual domestic based agencies that they're working with anyway. So it just kind of reaffirms you as, you're really serious about that client and really committed to them.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one is you're spending a lot of money, and then two is you're flying over, you're spending your time just to meet those clients. So it definitely shows sheer commitment of doing business with them, and it also says that you value the relationship and the time. It talks a lot about your overall business objective.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Yeah. One of our clients who really kind of believes quite strongly in that concept said to us that is, you will never see more return on investment from business development approach than by doing something like that. So obviously it will cost a lot in the first place to kind of do that. You're not for the most part probably going to do that every month. It might be once a year, might be twice a year, for example, like you get that might be once a quarter. But the actual return on that investment that you make is incalculable. Because
Absolutely, because in-person relationships, and there are a number of podcasts and blogs on that. So we don't want to talk a lot about it, but people know, especially in recruitment, the value of spending time in person and meeting clients in person. So definitely. So in terms of some of the best possible scenarios and case studies that you have, Will, of helping your clients through, what are the top 3 or 5 sort of points you would sort of recommend agencies who are wanting to launch in the in the US?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I would say number one is have a niche. So know what you're kind of known for, or like kind of find something that you want to be known for, and kind of focus down on that niche. That will really help you build a name for yourself, like we said before, and build some momentum. I would try to keep your approach to a minimum, like we said, so focus down that niche and that target market as well. It will really help when you're getting started. And then one of the other things as well that we'd say is referrals. Referrals are massive in America. Again, it's the cheapest investment ever is asking someone on the end of a call that you're already on with, do you know anybody else who can help us, or that you know who's done the same role if it's a candidate. And we had one client make 10 placements off the back of asking one candidate, you know, do you know anybody else that can do this role? So that's, and it's really, really effective. Having somebody else pitch your business really seems to kind of go even further in the US. And then other than that, just speak to professionals. If there's ever anything you're unsure of, don't take a chance in the US. It is a litigious market. While it is amazing, it can be really high risk. So you want to make sure that you're speaking to people who understand that, who get it, and kind of understand the pitfalls that maybe you're not seeing, and will point them out to you as well. So, and if you've ever got any kind of random needs of whatever it might be, whether or not it's some kind of, you know, really random contact that it might be that you require, just give us a shout. We've got like a really good Rolodex of people that we can introduce you to.
Sure, sure. So in summary, it's obviously, you know, thrice the size of the UK market, and then you know, obviously a bigger pie to actually, you know, capture from. And then two is, you know, a highly legislative driven market. So every state has different laws and legislations. So that's another thing to sort of keep in mind, especially when it comes to, you know, contract compliances, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. So I would say, yeah, no, the market opportunity is amazing. It's you know, 3.5 to 4 times bigger of a market to go after. And because of that, yeah, like you said, all those states will be very different. So to kind of break them down state by state, and kind of have that approach there, because from a legislation point of view, from a relationship point of view, from a tax point of view, all of those states operate kind of independently of each other in some respects.
Definitely, definitely. And then, in case our audience, you know, obviously, listeners want to sort of reach out to you, you know, you got your LinkedIn profile, and they can reach out. And, you know, in case anybody has any questions here, they can, you know, put in the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please ask any questions that you've got. Either put them in the comments, and I'll come back to them, because I know we're wrapping up now. Or you can send me a message directly on LinkedIn. On my LinkedIn profile, as well as a link to our website. So if you've got any questions about anything we've covered today, or something specific for your business and your needs in the US, that link will kind of take you through to a bit on the website where you can just book in some time to have a chat with us. So please don't hesitate to reach out at any time.
Fantastic. So, Will, thank you very much for being on the Recruitment Curry Show. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you get lots and lots of you know, UK businesses to launch in the US.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time and having us on, Ketan. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Will. Cheers.